There's our author. So as I was saying, I am so glad to see you. So I'm with the Media Center. We mostly train people in video, but a couple of years ago we started a project. It's called Made into America. And it highlights the stories of immigration to the U.S. in every era of our history. And that's because immigration stories are so integral to our country's story, and our community's story as well. We've been collecting stories. I see Thomas, other people here who've submitted a story, Bart, and or helped me gather stories. We've been collecting from families who have shared something, and it's amazing. So often it involves a very dramatic passage just to get here. So often there's a war involved, or a famine, or people leaving very dire poverty circumstances. And almost always there's a dream. And there's a dream for a better life, and usually it's a dream for their children's better life. And so they embark on a very heroic journey and start from scratch, new language, new customs, as we're going to hear later from our wonderful author. And they basically start this new and difficult life, finding work, etc. So I would love it if you might all find the time in the coming days to check out this archive of stories we've been putting together. It's called, on the internet, it's called madeintoamerica.org. And if you leave a couple of comments, if you're moved by a story, it really makes the authors feel good. Just yesterday morning, I got a poem from a kid in a tiny town in North Carolina, an immigrant high school student, and talks about, the difficulty of just even liking herself in the midst of all the change. And this morning I exchanged emails with her teacher and promised that I'll send the video of Professor Jiménez reading, because he has inspired so many with his story. And so just so you know, add one high school student in North Carolina who's soon going to be inspired by your work. We're so honored to have you, and I just want to say that Professor Jiménez has been incredibly generous to give his time for our presentation and helping us with our project. We also want to thank the Silicon Valley Community Foundation for making this possible, and of course, our Palo Alto Library and Friends of the Library. And we're one of the first new, programs in this wonderful new room. So I just want to introduce Ruth Ann Garcia from the library.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Ruth Ann Garcia. I'm the manager of the Mitchell Park Library, but I am in charge of adult programs. And so when Elliot came and said, I think I can get Francisco Jiménez here, we immediately jumped on the opportunity to have him speak in our brand new program room out in our brand new, newly renovated Rinconada Library. How many of you are here for the very first time? Oh, good. It's quite a few hands. So this is a real honor for the library. It's a real privilege for me personally. I read The Circuit in college in the Chicano Lit class, and I have recommended it. I've book talked it to a bunch of kids and students and library customers throughout the years. And I've just recently read Más Allá in my Spanish class at the Palo Alto Adult School. So it's a real privilege for me to have Professor Jiménez here speaking at the library. The story is timeless. The struggle continues and is very real. This program is very important for our community, for the youth in our community. So I hope with the words that we hear tonight, you all just go back to where you live and work and share that inspiration with the people around you, the youth around you, and think of ways how we can support people in our community and our country who still persevere and have the same struggles as Professor Jiménez experienced many years ago. So welcome, Professor Jiménez, and we're going to have a really enjoyable evening tonight. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Thank you so much, Mrs. Garcia, for that wonderful and generous introduction. And thank you all for being here and for that warm applause, for that warm welcome. I truly feel honored. I'm delighted that this event is being held in this library because I have an obsession with libraries. I have spent many hours and days, literally, going to libraries to take out books for reading enjoyment and to do research. And the first thing that I do whenever I visit a town or a city or a library for the first time, the first thing I do is I go to the library. And the reason I do that is because libraries indicate what that community values, what that university values. And it's obvious to me by looking at this wonderful library that you have a lot of support from your community. And for me, libraries in many ways represent the heart and soul of our communities. So it's wonderful to have this presentation here. Before I begin my presentation, I would like to thank Mr. Margolis. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And Ruth Ann Garcia for making this event possible. And I would also like to thank Joshua Alvarez, who is sitting here, who wrote a wonderful article for the Palo Alto Weekly. I was very touched by the article, so I thank you very much for writing it. I suspect that many people are present because of your article.
I hope so.
Right? It's a wonderful writer. In my presentation, I plan to do two things. First, I will make a few introductory remarks about Taking Hold, which is my most recent book. And then I will read a couple of selections from it. And then I'll explain to you why I write. And my explanation as to why I write relates to what you were just suggesting that individuals in the audience do, to tell their own stories. I was hoping to be able to show you some photographs on a PowerPoint, but unfortunately I will not be able to do so. But in the cover of Taking Hold, there's a little picture of me and my older brother and my younger siblings, and it was taken in Tent City, a migrant camp in Santa Maria, California, which was the first place that my family lived in when we moved from Mexico, hoping to leave our poverty behind, and moved and crossed the border without documentation. And we began our life as migrant workers in Santa Maria, living in this migrant camp called Tent City. And the owner of the strawberry fields that grown in Santa Maria, Shihi, took tents from World War II, converted them for living quarters for migrant workers. So when you see the cover, you'll see that the tent that you might not be able to see from back there is where we lived. And my older brother is the tall boy here, Roberto, who is a main character in my stories. And then in front of Roberto is my little brother, whom we call Trampita. And Trampita means little tramp. And the reason we called him Trampita was that about a quarter of a mile from Tent City was the public dump, the city dump. And my parents and the younger siblings would frequent the city dump to get things that we needed. So in one occasion, they found baby clothes and dress trampita in them. And ever since then, we call him Trampita, little tramp. Trampita is grown. He's an adult, of course. And he's married and has children. And we still call him Trampita. But he says to me, Panchito, which is my nickname, don't call me Trampita in front of people who know Spanish because I get embarrassed. And I say, okay, Trampita, I won't do that. And the kid that you see next to Trampita, that's me. For those of you who do not know part of my background, we started our life in Santa Maria, picking strawberries. And then after the strawberry season would be over, we would move to the San Joaquin Valley, where we pick grapes for wine, but mainly for raisins, Thompson, what we call seedless Thompson grapes. And then after the grape season would be over, we would move to Corcoran, California, to another migrant camp. And there we pick cotton. And cotton was picked by hand many years ago. Now it's picked by machines. That indicates to you how old I am. And then after the cotton season would be over, we would come back to Santa Maria at the end of December, first part of January, after the cotton season would be over. And in Santa Maria, we would pick carrots or top carrots and thin lettuce. And that was the migrant circuit that we followed every single year. My older brother and I had to work alongside our parents to make ends meet, so we missed a lot of school. I would miss the first 2.5 months of school every year. My older brother, being the oldest in our family, he missed half a school year every year. He would not start school until we returned to Santa Maria in January after Christmas. And my biggest struggle in going to school was English. I had to, because at home we only spoke Spanish. But because English was my most difficult subject, I worked the hardest in it. And thanks to some wonderful teachers that I had along the way, I think of one in particular whom I mentioned in the circuit, my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Lema, who during the lunch hour, he would help me with my English. And then I established a good relationship with Mr. Lema. He did not know Spanish, he was Portuguese. But he valued my Mexican cultural background, and he took an interest in me and found out that I loved Mexican music, especially corridos, Mexican ballads. And as you know, for those of you who are familiar with corridos, the trumpet is one of the instruments that is very widely used. So Mr. Lema offered to help me learn to play the trumpet during our lunch hour. And so when he told me that, I was very excited. So I run home. No, I didn't run home. I ran and took the bus. And when we got off the bus, to tell my parents how excited I was that I was going to be able to learn to play the trumpet, when I opened the door to our shack, I saw that everything we owned was packed in cardboard boxes, and so we had to move. So I never learned to play the trumpet. But, and I never saw Mr. Lema again. But I took Mr. Lema with me, and because he valued my Mexican background, and because he took an interest in me, I wanted to be like Mr. Lema. I wanted to be a teacher. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know what it meant what I needed to do to become a teacher, but I wanted to be like Mr. Lema. And so I mention him because in my experience, life experience, I was blessed with so many people along the way who helped me out. And thanks to them, thanks to the struggles and sacrifices that my parents made when they crossed the border and came to this country and struggled and suffered, and like many immigrant groups do. Thanks to them, and especially to my teachers, I was able to break the migrant circuit. So I'd like to ask, how many of you are teachers or are planning to be teachers? Oh, wonderful. So I am a teacher too, but what I have to say is not self-serving. I have the greatest admiration and respect for teachers, because without teachers, I would not be where I am today. So thank you so much for making a difference in your students' lives. You don't, and obviously anyone who's involved in education offers the same blessings, right? Librarians, for example, there's Chuck, how are you? Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't. I just saw Chuck, who is responsible in many ways for making the circuit a success. He was on the Beatty Award committee. It's a Beatty Award. It's a literary award given by the California Libraries Association. And luckily, he was on that committee that picked the book, and so that brought attention to the book. So when I say they were blessed, there are people, many blessings in my life. He's one of them. So thank you for being here. When I was in the 8th grade, we got deported back to Mexico, and then came back legally thanks to Ito, the Japanese sharecropper for whom we picked strawberries. He loaned us money and then sponsored us. So we came back legally and settled permanently in Santa Maria because my father could no longer work in the fields because of severe back problems. And my older brother and I then got janitorial jobs working 30 to 35 hours a week each in order to help support our family. And then thanks to Mr. Penny, my high school counselor, I was able to come to Santa Clara University to go to college. He suggested that I give my janitorial job to Trampita. So he could continue supporting our family. And thanks to Trampita and Mr. Penny, I was able to come to Santa Clara and go to college. Get my education there. I borrowed money to go to Santa Clara. At that time, again, I'm going to indicate to you how old I am. The year that I came to Santa Clara in 1962, tuition was $1,000. And room and board was another $1,000. So I got enough financial aid and local scholarships like the Kiwanis Club, the Rotary Club, the Bank of America, and Las Madrinas. And the total was $1,000. So thanks to Mr. Penny, I was able to borrow another $1,000 so that I could pay my first year at Santa Clara. And in Santa Clara, I struggled, especially in my first year. I won't give you the whole story, but just to give you some background for the readings. At Santa Clara, I was challenged tremendously because I found myself in an environment that was very different from the environment in which I was raised. Everyone around me seemed so much more intelligent, so much more well-prepared than I was. And when I began to feel inadequate and discouraged, that's when I began to reflect on my childhood experiences to give me the courage not to give up. And so I began to take notes about those childhood experiences. And I did that throughout my 4 years. And then I received a fellowship to go to Columbia University. And my first year at Columbia, I felt the same way as I did my first year at Santa Clara. So I relied on those notes that I had taken, those recollections, those reflections from my childhood, again, to give me the courage to go on. Professor Andres Duarte, who directed my thesis, and I'll read a chapter about him, was very helpful to me. He was a writer himself. And when he found out that I had written some things, he asked me to show them to him. And I was really reluctant because he was an accomplished writer. So I showed him some of my scribblings, and he encouraged me to write, to put those recollections together and write my story. He said, "You should write your story." And they said, "You do have the talent." So when I began then to write the circuit in Spanish, originally, cajas de cartón, immediately I realized that my experience was not unique, that it was really the experience of many, many families from the past and the present. And that realization prompted me to continue writing, that I wanted to tell that story. And so as Mrs. Garcia indicated, I wrote the circuit, Stories from the Life of a Migrant Child, that takes place, it ends with our being deported. And then the sequel, Breaking Through, begins where the circuit ends with our being deported and then coming back legally and settling in Santa Maria. And I describe what our life was like during those 4 years in high school. And then the sequel to Breaking Through is Reaching Out, where I describe my experience as a first-generation college student at Santa Clara University. And then the fourth one is Taking Hold. And as you pointed out, Joshua, what connects all these stories is really the power or the transformational power of education. Okay? So with those remarks, I will then read the first chapter of Taking Hold. But I'll make a few remarks before I read it. In Taking Hold, I relate memorable, life-changing experiences I had living in New York City while I attended Columbia University. Focusing on the transformational power of education, I relate the challenges I faced in completing my formal education and my efforts to find stability and purpose in my personal and professional life during an era marked by social and political unrest, the war in Vietnam, and the counterculture and the civil rights movements. Interwoven in the narrative is what life was like for me as a child, and the experiences are narrated from the perspective of the young adult I was then. So the first reading, again, is from the first chapter titled Inside the Gates, and it serves as an introduction to the rest of the book. In the late afternoon of September 12th, I boarded a TWA 747 in San Francisco. I was headed for graduate school at Columbia University in New York City. Although I felt grateful for having been awarded a fellowship that allowed me to continue my education at Columbia, I did not know what to expect. And leaving my family and Laura, my girlfriend, was extremely painful. I would not see them again for a very long time. As I waited for the plane to take off, I thought about how different this journey was from the one my family and I took when we left our home in El Rancho Blanco, a small village in rural Mexico 19 years earlier. I was 4 years old at the time. We took a sluggish second-class train that had hard wooden seats from Guadalajara to Mexicali and crossed the U.S.-Mexican border illegally by foot. Although we did not know where we would end up and were fearful of being caught by the Migra, the Border Patrol, my family was hopeful that we would escape our poverty and begin a new and better life. The plane to New York finally landed at JFK Airport after a 6-hour flight. It was 1 a.m. The opaque yellow lights in the cabin of the crowded plane went on, waking the weary passengers who scrambled to pick up their belongings. I glanced out the narrow oval window. Blinking red lights on the tip of the wings pierced the darkness. I unbuckled my seatbelt and pulled from the bin above my small brown suitcase and portable typewriter enclosed in a blue case, which my older brother Roberto and his wife Darlene had given me as a college graduation gift. All during college, I had borrowed my roommate's typewriters because I could not afford my own. I got off the plane, followed the signs to ground transportation, exited the terminal, and waited in the curb for a taxi. The stagnant air was hot, humid, and foul-smelling like gasoline and burning rubber. A beat-up yellow cab pulled over. "Where to?" The driver shouted through the front window before I had a chance to respond. He hollered, "Come on, man, where to?" "Columbia University," I said. "Hop in," he yelled. I quickly opened the back door, tossed my baggage on the seat, shut it, and opened the passenger door. "Aren't you sitting in the back?" he asked. "I prefer to sit in the front," I said. He rolled his eyes and grudgingly removed a pile of scattered papers and a clipboard from the passenger seat and tossed them on the dashboard. "Thank you," I said, sliding into the seat and shutting the door. Leaning slightly forward and gripping the steering wheel with both hands, he raced out of the airport onto the freeway. I grabbed the edge of the seat and pushed both feet against the floorboard as he zigzagged past cars and trucks and went under connecting freeways that crisscrossed like concrete pretzels. We zoomed by smoke-covered industrial brick buildings with dimly lit narrow windows. On the horizon appeared clusters of grayish skyscrapers radiating startling lights. To avoid the increasingly congested traffic, the cab driver veered off the freeway onto one-way roads that led to bumpy streets and eventually to a long, wide avenue. On both sides of it were endless, massive, and haggard buildings and round-down stores, entrances, and display windows shielded by steel shutters that made them look like jail cells. "Are we almost there?" I asked, breaking the long silence. He slowed down, lowered his window slightly, spit out of it, nodded, and said, "We're on Broadway and 110th, 6 more blocks." At 116th Street, he pulled over and stopped in front of a tall, wide, black iron gate. "Here you are," he said. "This is the main entrance to Columbia." "Where's Hartley Hall?" I asked. Hartley Hall was the building where I was to pick up the key to my room in John J. Hall. "It's on the other side of the street," he said. "Can't drive in. 116th is closed to traffic." We climbed out of the car. He opened the back door and reached in to get my luggage. "I've got it, thanks," I said. He moved to the side, gave me a puzzled look, and told me the cab fare was $20. The high cost shocked me. I bit my lip, unloaded my belongings, and handed him 2 $10 bills and thanked him. "Good luck," he said, folding the bills in half and placing them in his shirt pocket. He got back in the car and sped off. I stood alone. glancing up at the gate. Then I picked up my typewriter case and suitcase and began walking past the gate along a wide, dark, red brick path. Suddenly, an immense courtyard, framed on both sides by massive buildings with Greek column, exploded into view. I stood there for a moment, marveling at their colossal size, feeling as though I was entering another world. And it was another world, believe me. When I came to Santa Clara my freshman year, I thought Santa Clara was cosmopolitan. When I got to New York, I was shocked. The second reading, one of the first and most important classes I took at Columbia was on the literature of the Mexican Revolution of 1910. It was taught by Professor Andrés Duarte, an accomplished essayist and specialist in Latin American literature. He became my mentor and PhD thesis advisor. Philip Andrews, whom I mentioned in this reading selection, was a brilliant graduate student who lived across the hall from me in John Jay Hall. And John Jay Hall was a dormitory for graduate students. And the title of this chapter is A Revolution. And I will only read an excerpt from it. By the end of the day on Thursday of the first week of classes, I found myself staggering under an incredibly heavy load of assignments and surrounded by older graduate students who were far more knowledgeable and experienced and confident than I was. The majority of them came from Spanish-speaking countries and had attended prestigious universities in the United States and abroad. I felt intimidated and insecure about my academic preparation and aptitude. The fear of failing classes, losing my fellowship, and disappointing my family and the many people who made it possible for me to be at Columbia began to haunt me. I must not let them down, I told myself. I had had similar feelings during my freshman year in college, and I managed to deal with them by working extra hard and praying and drawing strength from my childhood experiences and getting help from my professors. I would do the same here, I decided. The biggest challenge would be to find supportive and caring professors who, according to Philip Andrews, were in short supply at Columbia. Fortunately, Andrés Duarte, who taught the Mexican Revolution literature course, turned out to be one of those rare professors. The class met on Fridays in the late afternoon on the second floor of Philosophy Hall. On the first day of class, I arrived early and took a seat in the front row near a window overlooking the statue of the thinker. I placed my spiral notebook on my desk and nervously waited for the professor. As students entered the classroom, I mistakenly perceived a few of the older ones to be the teacher. They wore sport coats with ties and carried briefcases, but once each one occupied a desk, I knew, too, they were students. After we waited 10 minutes past the starting time, a man in his early 60s appeared at the door looking like a portrait of a diplomat in a picture frame. He took off his hat, exposing a large, balding, perfectly round head, and introduced himself as Andrés Duarte. He wore a double-breasted dark blue suit, a white shirt and red tie, and he carried a bulging black leather briefcase. He had broad shoulders, a protruding stomach, and small feet. He walked in, sat behind a small wooden table facing the class, and greeted us in a deep, raspy voice. ¿Qué tal, jóvenes? That's the way he sounded. He unbuttoned his coat, reached into his briefcase, took out several thick leather-bound books, and piled them on the table next to his hat. He breathed heavily as he took attendance, made friendly comments on each of the names, and jotted down notes with a mechanical pencil on the class roster. He had long, slender hands that were full of life and energy. When he got to my name, he asked politely if I was ever referred to as Panchito, which is the nickname of Francisco. Yes, my family calls me by that name, I said. I was nervous, but pleased. He gave me a friendly smile and continued taking roll. When he was done, he began discussing in a thoughtful, dignified way, without being formal, the writers of the Mexican Revolution of 1910. One by one, he picked up the volumes containing the complete works of each of the authors we were to read and made personal remarks about each one of them. Professor Duarte described his relationship with Martín Luis Guzmán, Pancho Villa's private secretary, who wrote Memorias de Pancho Villa and El Águila y la Serpiente, The Eagle and the Serpent. Professor Duarte and Guzmán were classmates at the Escuela Nacional Preparatoria, the oldest and most prestigious high school in Mexico City. He described his friendship with the artists Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo during the time he was the director of the Instituto Nacional de Bellas Artes, the cultural center in Mexico City. He had been appointed to this post by Lázaro Cárdenas, the former president of Mexico. He also mentioned other essayists, artists, poets, intellectuals, and political figures from the period of the Revolution. His conversational tone and extensive knowledge of Mexican literature and culture were mesmerizing. What he was saying was for me like rain falling on dry ground. For the first time, I had a teacher who was Mexican, who taught a class dealing with my native culture, a subject I had heard my father and other relatives talk about when I was a child. Thank you. I was going to read you another excerpt, but I think I won't. Dealing with my experience teaching my first college class, but I think I'll skip that and tell you why I write, and then have you ask questions. In a thought-provoking essay, philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre writes, and I quote, "Every society enacts its own history as a more or less coherent dramatic narrative, inviting its citizens to participate in national life by considering themselves both as characters in that story and authors of it. Members of a nation of immigrants must come to terms with two dramatic narratives, that of the American people and that of the particular ethnic group to which they belong. If we do not recover and identify with the particularities of our own community, North American Indian, Spanish Catholic, New England Protestant, European Jew, Irish, Black African, Japanese, and a host of others, then we shall lose what it is that we have to contribute to the common culture. We shall have nothing to bring, nothing to give. I believe that our task as teachers, as scholars and writers, is to recover and analyze and transmit stories by and about the different ethnic groups that make up our culturally diverse society. We must break through and expand the common culture through texts reflecting our culturally diverse society. In other words, multicultural literacy is part of the mandate for a learned society. The importance of multicultural literacy to a large degree inspires my writing. I wrote the circuit, breaking through, reaching out, and taking hold to document part of my family's history, but more importantly, to voice the experiences of Mexican immigrants, some of whom are migrant farm workers, whose courage, struggles, and hopes and dreams for a better life for their children and their children's children give meaning to the term the American dream. Their story is an important and integral part of the American story. It is your story. In conclusion, I would like to re-emphasize what you said. I would like to encourage you to tell your own stories. As American writer Madeleine d'Engle states, and I quote, "If you don't recount your family history, it will be lost. Honor your own stories and tell them too. The tales may not seem very important, but they are what binds families and makes each of us who we are." Unquote. In addition, when we tell our stories, when we listen to the voices of the different groups that make up our diverse society, we make connections. And when we make connections, we break down walls that separate us from one another. We become enriched, and consequently, we take comfort and rejoice in our shared humanity. So I encourage you to tell your stories. So thank you very much.
My question was about translation.
Yeah.
So I think I understood correctly, you wrote the circuit originally in Spanish,
Yes.
and then translated it.
Right.
And as you became kind of more comfortable and more immersed in English, was the process still the same? Did you continue writing in Spanish and translating into English, or did you at some point?
That's an excellent question. It was easy for me to write the first one in Spanish, Cajas de Cartón, because all the experiences that I relate there took place during the time where Spanish was dominant. The sequel, Breaking Through, I wrote it in English because the setting is high school. So I began, and the same thing with Reaching Out. But as I was translating the stories from Spanish into English, it was a little challenging because, as you know, many of the expressions cannot be translated literally. And consequently, I left some of the words in Spanish only in cases where the reader would be able to figure out what they meant in English. And in the later works, my editor insisted that I give the translation because got some letters from readers saying that they were challenged. They really needed to know what these words meant. So I did that. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm also a teacher, and I have many students who are either immigrants or first generation in college. I teach at San Jose State. And many of them have the same kinds of self-doubt that you talked about. And I was wondering if you could just give us some thoughts as teachers of things we could do to help our students who are struggling with these kinds of thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. One of the motivations for writing, as I mentioned, these books is knowing that my experiences were common experiences, and that's true of first-generation college students. I don't have the silver bullet, but I think that the one thing that can be done for them is to value the experiences they bring to the classroom. I tell at Santa Clara University, where we have a large number of first-generation college students who come from humble backgrounds, I tell them, you have a lot to offer. Your experience will enrich the experiences of those people around you, even though they may seem a lot more intelligent than you are. they're not necessarily more intelligent. They've had more resources. But so I encourage you to work hard and know that because you have been admitted to Santa Clara or San Jose State or wherever, the institution believes in you by having admitted you. So they know that you're going to succeed, and you will succeed, but you need help. We all need help, as you pointed out. We all need help. And so I encourage them to seek help from professors, to come and visit them during their office hours. And as professors, we have the responsibility, it seems to me, to reach out to them if they're struggling, and to help them with their self-confidence. It's really the issue of self-confidence. But other than that, the other thing too, at least for me, is when they read works to which they can relate, makes a huge difference. I mentioned in this book, one of the books we read for Professor Duarte's class on the Mexican Revolution was Mariano Azuela's Los de Abajo, The Underdogs. And and the author uses a lot of dialogue, and the setting is the state of Jalisco and Zacatecas. And when I started reading it and the dialogue, I said, oh my God, this is how we speak at home. This is my father speaking. And thinking about what that meant was that it's being studied at the university level. It's nice, isn't it? And the one thing that I experienced in my own educational career was during my sophomore year in high school. I had, and I talk about this in Breaking Through, I had a wonderful teacher, very strict, English teacher, Mrs. Bell, who introduced me to The Grapes of Wrath. And there was a very difficult book to read, but for the first time, I was able to relate to a piece of literature that moved hearts and minds. And that book turned me around. I thought, this is beautiful. This is not just the George story. It's the story of my family, other migrant families who struggle and suffer discrimination, and like the young man who fights for his rights. So I think that's an important thing to do, is to use materials, that relate to their own experiences, and affirms the value of what they bring to the classroom in terms of their own cultural heritage. Does that help a little bit? Yeah, thank you.
So in my 7th grade English class, we're reading your book, Breaking Through, and when I first picked it up, I couldn't stop reading it, so thank you for that. And I have to ask, what was, through your hardest times, what really got you through those times?
During the hardest time, what got me?
Throughout your life,
yes.
When you had challenging times,
Yeah.
what really got you through that?
Yeah. Well, there's a few, a very good question, and thank you for your nice comment. In terms of my own family, my mother was the one who gave us the courage not to give up. She's passed away. She was very religious, and insisted that we should not lose hope, and that we should have faith in God, that God would make a difference eventually for our lives, in our lives. And the other thing that, aside from my own family, then Mrs. Bell introducing me to The Grapes of Wrath. The other thing that I discovered in the 6th grade was, during the time I was in the 6th grade, I should say, I was tired of moving missing school every year and falling behind my classmates. I wanted a place to call my own. I wanted stability in my life. And where I found it was in education. That whatever I learned in school, no matter how many times we would move, that knowledge would go with me. So in this very, very unstable life that we were living, where I found a sense of permanence, of stability, was in learning, in education. So it's not surprising that I became a cheerleader for education, right? Yeah, because I tell my students, or young people like yourselves, that education gives you options, choices of the kind of work that you want to do and the kind of life that you want to live. My parents did not have formal education, so their choices were limited. The work that they did in the fields was noble work. All work is noble and should be respected and valued. But the difference is, if you get a good education, you can make those choices, right? So those are the things that help me out. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I'm in middle school currently, and in 5th grade, I went to a dual immersion school, and we actually read your first book, and it makes me wonder, what was your audience for this book?
For the first book?
Yeah. You.
When I wrote the first book, I narrated from the child's point of view, and my hope that it would be accessible to young people like yourselves as well as adults. And fortunately, that has been my experience, that the book is read by young people and as well as adults, and they appreciate it. And as I say, for those of you who have not read it, I narrate it from the child's point of view because I wanted readers to feel through the child's heart and to see life through the child's eyes. And so, so that some people point out that there's no reflection, analysis of the political situation that we were experiencing. And I say, well, that's why I wrote it from the child's point of view. I didn't want to get into that part of I'll leave that to the political scientists and the sociologists and so forth. Yeah, thank you for asking that question.
The question I have, or that we have for you, is such a struggle, obviously, to gain your education, overcoming the obstacles of making ends meet. We're at the point where your father is struggling. And did you ever feel that, maybe it was so much of a struggle to continue? I mean, because to finish high school was quite a hard task with everything that your brother and you had going on with the work that you need to perform. So did you ever feel that maybe it would be best for your family to leave high school, or maybe that your family might prefer for you to work full time? Did you ever feel have any of those questions in your mind?
No. My older brother graduated from high school 2 years after he should have graduated. And he told me that at one point he had fallen so far behind when we moved permanently to Santa Maria that he really thought that perhaps he should leave the school. But he said, "I'm glad I did not. I stuck it out, even though it took him 2 more years." Yeah. I never thought of leaving school. I loved learning for the reason that I just gave to the young boy. And I knew by then that the best means to escape our poverty was to get a good education. And then I had one of my high school advisors who said that if you get good grades, you can go on to college and it won't cost you. And I said, wait a minute. Say that again? And he reinforced the fact that if you applied yourself, got good grades, that you would get scholarships and universities would pay your education. So that was a motivation for me. Although I did not know at what point I was going to be able to go to college because I was still working to support our family. But I felt that at some point in my life, that opportunity would come and I would seize on it. And so that was the reasoning behind that. Thank you for asking. Mm-hmm.
For you, what was the bigger excitement in your life? Getting your education or giving education to others?
Wow. That's a very good question, Chuck. You know, I mean, I would have to say they're related because the purpose and meaning of my life is helping young people develop their God-given talents through education. And that's very satisfying to me. And it's satisfying because I was blessed with people along the way who helped me. And so I feel the obligation that I should reach out and help others, you see. So...
And I never had I was born in San Francisco and spoke English all my whole life, so I had to never struggle with another language when I was in school.
Yes.
But I had my own shortcomings when it came to education. It took me a while to get through college and everything. But I was a children's librarian for 35 years, and I just loved that. Thank you. I just loved getting children excited in books and reading and literature and learning especially. But I found for myself that in all of those 35 years, even though I loved every minute of it, the most exciting part of my professional career was the 2 years that I taught the children's literature class in the library school at San Jose State. And I found that challenging, rewarding, and I had to stay at least a step in front of the students, and that was a real challenge.
It really is a challenge. But the rewards are tremendous. Yeah.
After you rest some more,
Can you hold it?
after you rest some more, do you think you might write another book continuing your story?
No, I have an idea, and it's been percolating for another children's story. Yeah, but.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase this. You are wonderful in motivating children to, deal with their immigration experience. But I'm a little bit of an activist sometimes, and do you seek out or do you have opportunities to talk to groups that are sort of on the fence about immigration? Not total anti-immigrant type people, but those that might have their hearts and minds swayed a little bit by your story?
Yes, I do. Now that whenever I have time, I do get invitations to visit schools and give presentations, and I take advantage of it because I want to impress upon young people the importance of education. I go to communities that are underserved. I went to Immokalee, Florida, where there's a large population of migrant families. I've gone to Oregon, same thing. And I also have been invited to Exeter, which is a very exclusive school, and they adopted cajas de cartón in their curriculum, so I went there. And I take advantage of talking to different groups because, as I mentioned earlier, that to encourage them to tell their stories and to value to be respectful of each other's cultural heritage and to be proud of it. And also in the more privileged schools like Exeter, it's important for young people to develop a conscience about social justice, because most likely they're going to be in positions that will make decisions that will affect our communities. And so if they have compassion and a conscience and are ethical, they're going to make the right decisions that will benefit not only themselves, but everyone, you see. So I don't limit it to one group or another. Mm-hmm.